Hi, I'm Forrest Tanaka, and today starts a new video series where I go over how to build your own photography website based on WordPress. Now, I've been seeing this question quite a bit lately of photographers wondering what service to use to have their own website. So I'm going to go over some of the options real quickly and then go down the path of using WordPress and your own web host to build your own website. So let's get started. Let's go over what we'll cover during this set of videos. The first thing is what are the different options you have as far as hosting your site. So I'll go over some of the services, but I'll go down just one path for the rest of the video, which is your own WordPress site. Then we'll go over how to choose a host for your website and signing up for a domain name. Then we'll go over how to set up WordPress on that hosting service, and then how to administer your WordPress site. And that means setting up the different pages, their contents, blog posts, setting up the menus, that kind of thing. Then we'll go over WordPress themes, which is the way that you choose how your site looks and to some extent how it works. And I'll use an example theme that I wrote as the basis for this example website I'll be making. Then we'll go over how to optimize your photos so that they look really great and really sharp for the web. Then we'll go over some of the WordPress plugins, like ones that will give your site social networking buttons and will help your search engine optimization, that kind of thing. And the last thing I'll go over real briefly is search engine optimization, like myths and how to get you started down the right track as far as that's concerned. So let's get started with how or where to put your site. And now the first thing I'll cover are free blogging services. Now a lot of you are probably familiar with these already. A couple of the most famous are WordPress.com and Blogger.com. Now Blogger.com used to be called Blogspot until Google bought them, so you'll see those two terms, Blogger.com and Blogspot.com, but they're the same thing. Now, these are great services in that they're easy to set up, but the only thing is, really you can only blog on them. Putting together a multi-page site with an about page and a contact page and slideshows is going to be pretty tough to do there. So I'm going to treat that as not really an option. Not that photographers haven't done great things with that kind of service. David Hobby, his Strobist site, is on a Blogspot blog. Now this isn't his portfolio site. It's how he teaches anyone on the web how to handle photographic lighting. So Blogspot works great for him. But again, this is not his portfolio site. So another option are web publishing services. Now right now, a couple of the biggest ones are Movable Type and Squarespace. And these are actually really nice services because they can let you have or create a complete web page or website actually with galleries, shops, blogs, home pages, contact pages, everything you need for a complete site, which is really cool. I used Squarespace for a short time and found it didn't really work for me because I kept wanting to put my own coding in, and while it completely allows that, it's a little bit awkward as far as I'm concerned, and it was just easier to set up my own website. So that might not be a concern to you. What might be is the pricing. It's not necessarily that bad. Like Squarespace, I think their cheapest plan is about $15 a month US, and for that they handle all your bandwidth and your storage. Now, as you need more bandwidth and more storage, you might have to pay more, but it's definitely worth taking a look at these services because they can really get you what you want. You just have to balance it off with your other options. Among them are content management systems, which is the main topic today. Now, there's a little bit of controversy over that phrase, content management systems. Some people think that should be applied to things like Squarespace, but I mostly see it being used with these services that I describe here. These are the 3 most famous ones: Joomla, Drupal, and WordPress.org. Now, of course, I already talked about WordPress as a blogging service. This is WordPress still, but it's a different path, and I'll get into what the differences are in just a bit. Now, what these are is software that you can download from these services, and in these 3 cases, it's free, completely free and open source. And then you can put them on a host and build your website based on that. These services handle the data and the content. Meanwhile, other things like themes handle the way they look, and they're very customizable. You can build any site you want with these driving the data. Now, I did try Joomla. The way its model of doing things just didn't quite click with the way my mind works. I actually built a site based on Drupal, and again, I found it a little more complicated than I felt it needed to be. But when I got familiar with WordPress, that was exactly how I wanted a CMS to work. And so every site I've been building ever since then is a WordPress-based site. And in fact, that's my day job, is building custom websites with a WordPress backend. And that's exactly what I'll cover in this tutorial. So now I mentioned the difference between WordPress.com and WordPress.org, and why there's a little confusion there. WordPress.com is the free blogging service. WordPress.org is the CMS that you can download. And so they are basically the same company, but 2 different ways to work with them. Now, WordPress.com has the advantage that WordPress, the company, hosts your site for free. They handle all your bandwidth, they handle all your storage. Now, you can choose a theme for your website or your WordPress blog, but the choices are kind of limited, and there's not a lot of flexibility with them, and that's because it's designed for blogging. It's designed to be easy. And so it's really good at that, but maybe not so much for building your own website. And so building your website, of course, you need individual pages, like a contact page and whatever. WordPress.com doesn't really, at least not easily, let you do that, or slideshows and things like that. WordPress.org is the CMS. You download the WordPress engine from their site, and then you put it onto your host. That means you have to buy a host and develop your WordPress site on that. So that's the bill that you'll have with a WordPress-based site, is your hosting. WordPress.org, the software itself, costs nothing. But nice thing is, you can do anything. Any website on the web you could build with WordPress. The way it looks, the way it works. Now, that doesn't mean you'd always want to. Amazon would not want to build a site based on WordPress because the traffic would just completely slow it down. They need much beefier systems. But a small retail store, and certainly a photographer, can use WordPress, and it's perfectly good. And my own website for my photography and my web design is, of course, WordPress based with a custom theme that I designed. So that is where to put your site. And so we'll move on to the next topic, which is choosing a hosting service. Okay, now what I'm going to talk about for choosing a hosting service, first we'll look at the different kinds of hosting, because you'll be faced with that. Then we'll look at what you need to look for in a host so that it can host WordPress at all, because WordPress does have some minimum hosting requirements. Then there's some extra features you should look for in a hosting service that I recommend and that I'm going to assume that your hosting service has for this tutorial. And lastly, we'll look at some specific hosting providers that you can choose from, and of course you can choose others. So the different kinds of hosting. The first one we'll look at is the most expensive, just because it's the simplest. That's where your hosting provider allocates you an entire machine all to yourself, so you don't share that machine with anyone else. Now that gives you the best performance, of course. It's also the most expensive. A minimum I've seen is about $50 US per month, but I've seen it goes to several $100s per month, and which is great for like a good-sized retailer. Probably too much for a typical photographer's portfolio site. So the next step down is called virtual private servers. That's one you don't hear about that often, and that's where there's a machine that software is used to make it look like it's multiple machines or virtual machines, and then your website is allocated one of those virtual machines. So you'll share the hardware, the actual physical server, with a few other websites, maybe 10, maybe 20. Probably that's about the most. So it gives you a nice combination of price and performance. About the minimum I've seen is about $15 per month, up to about $50, but the way, depending on what kind of server you get and how many you're sharing it with, the costs vary quite a bit. You can probably find them for cheaper than $15 or way more than $50 per month. Now the last kind we'll look at is the kind you'll probably get, which is shared hosting. That's what my website uses. And it's really cheap, but that's because you're actually sharing a server with a whole bunch of other people. Don't be surprised if it's hundreds of other websites. So you'll pay for not as good performance, but in most cases you probably wouldn't notice. It's fine for most small websites. Okay, and now let's look at the minimum hosting requirements for WordPress. Some things that you should look for in the hosting advertisements is to make sure it has PHP 5.2.4 or later. Now this is January 2012. The current version of WordPress is 3.3.1 and it requires PHP version 5.2.4. If you're watching this way in the future, there may be different requirements, but right now this is a version of PHP. PHP is a computer language that runs on the server, not on the visitor's browser, and that's what lets websites be dynamic, so that each page has different content depending on what you typed in. Different blog posts can show up because of PHP. The other requirement is MySQL. This is a database, open source database that's owned by Oracle, and this is what WordPress uses to store your blog posts, usernames, passwords, the arrangement of the site, with the menus and all that stuff. And it requires MySQL version 5 or greater for your hosting. Now in most hosts advertisements, usually you'll see PHP 5 and MySQL 5. That's probably fine, but you'll probably want to make sure. And most hosting services I've seen offer an online chat service, and they'd be happy to help you in every case I've seen. Now one thing you might see sometimes, I've only seen it once, is the hosting service will ask if you want Windows or Linux hosting. Windows hosting is not the one you need because that's for .NET based websites, which is not what WordPress relies on. .NET is a proprietary web development environment from Microsoft, and if you ever go to a URL where it says .asp or .aspx at the end, that's from Windows hosting. Linux hosting offers PHP and MySQL, so that's the one you want. If it offers you that, I usually don't see that. So what else should you look for? Well, again, my tutorial is going to assume certain things, like one, your host offers a file manager. Now this is not something you're likely to see in the hosting advertisements. You might, I'm not sure. But definitely they'll tell you in their, maybe in their FAQs or in their online chat. So what that file manager should have is zip compression. That way you can send up a whole bunch of files, like WordPress itself, in one zip file. It means you have to be able to upload files to the file manager. And what's really useful, and not every host that offers a file manager offers this, is file editing. to be able to modify the text of certain files on the host itself. And this tutorial will assume you can do that. So make sure you get that. Most hosting services I've seen do offer that, but not all of them. So make sure you ask about that. Now for specific hosting providers, WordPress themselves recommends 4 different ones: Bluehost, DreamHost, Media Temple, and Laughing Squid. For the first 3, I've heard from other WordPress developers who've used them, hardly a bad word to be said, so I think they're pretty good services. I've never heard of Laughing Squid, but if WordPress supports them or recommends them, I'm sure they're plenty good. Now for my own experience, my own website is hosted by AN Hosting. They've been fine. No occasional downtimes, but not very often. And their service has been really good. So that's one I recommend personally. One I've heard from a lot of WordPress developers is Green Geeks. A lot of WordPress developers are happy with them. So that's another one to look at. And all of these should have all the things that I recommend and that I'll assume in this tutorial. Now, getting a hosting service. So what's the process? Unfortunately, every single one is totally different, so it doesn't really help for me to show you. But the vast majority, with the exception of GoDaddy, it's very easy to get through. And just very self-explanatory. So just rely on that. And if you ever have trouble, again, they have online chat in every case I've seen. They'd be happy to help. And then once you sign up for the service, make sure you get back from them. First, a URL to your host control panel or your admin panel. Some hosts offer both. Some just give you a control panel. Either way is fine. And make sure they give you an admin username and password. Once you have these 3 things, the URL, the admin username, and the admin password, you're set. You've got your hosting. You don't have WordPress yet, but you've got your hosting. Now, what about a domain name? In most cases, the hosting service themselves will ask if you want to have a domain name, or if you already have one. By domain name, I mean something .com. My own site is forest-tanaka.com. I got that from AN Hosting at the time that I signed up for the hosting service. So that's just the easiest way to go. It may not be the cheapest, but it's probably pretty close, as I say there. And but if you want to go with, you can use other third-party registrars, domain name registrars. And one I hear a lot is hover.com. I hear it advertised a lot, but I've also heard a lot of people say they use it and they've been happy with it. And it's a pretty good deal. You may find cheaper ones, but hover.com throws in stuff you may need, like domain name protection, things like that. So there you go. Once you get to this step, you have a hosting service and you're all set to install WordPress, which is what we'll do in the next part of this tutorial. So far we've done where to put your website and then choosing a hosting service and domain. So the first part of the second part of this tutorial is actually setting up WordPress on your hosting service, actually getting a running WordPress site. So we're going to do some live demos of installing WordPress onto a hosting service in part 2. So that should be pretty exciting, and I hope to see you there. Thanks a lot.